And now it's time to go back to our plan and look at what we're going to do next. We're able to make the character log in now. So we need to make the character able to fight against multiple AI. We need to have money gains, a healing shop, and a weapon shop. We can go ahead and start with the combat system. But before we do the combat system, we need to make the monsters. We already have the data structure here, so let's go ahead and put them in the database. Again, we're going to need to create a new table. So you can do that from here. Number of columns is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're going to create the monsters table with 7 columns. So we're going to be ID, level, max health, strength. Intelligence, endurance, and attacks. Attacks is interesting. I'll explain that in a little bit. This is whenever it needs to be an auto increment, so that it automatically sets it to whatever value when we insert a new monster. Level is going to be a small integer. Max health is going to be a float of 12,2. Strength, intelligence, endurance are all integers. Attacks is a text field. Save the table. There we go. We're all good. Alright, so now that we have our database all set up with users and monsters, we're going to go ahead and make the user profile. To make the user profile, we're first going to need to create an object for the user, like a data object. So we're going to go ahead and do that here. I'm going to go ahead and take this segment to do a little bit of a brief reminder of object-oriented programming and classes for anybody who is maybe a little bit rusty on it. So this is our class declaration, where you say class name, you have these brackets, and then what you're going to do is you're going to put a bunch of what's called members here, or properties. And then you're going to have some methods, also known as functions. This is also known as variables. So when you start talking about classes, people stop calling them variables and they start calling them members and properties because the class itself is a variable. So, and then they call them methods instead of functions. This is just terms. This is members, properties, variables. This is all the same thing. Methods, functions. It's the same thing. It's just these terms are used to refer to them when they're part of a class. So for the user class, we can go back to our data structure, pretty much just copy paste this in here. So you're declaring these here. You can use, if you don't have any other needs to abstract your data, you can just use public for now. You can just access it all directly. That's the simplest way to handle it. So you just do this. Okay, ID. Oh, we're missing our, let me add this real quick to here. Username, password. Password is not something that's important to store in this class, because the only time we deal with the password, really, I mean, I guess we could, but the only time we usually deal with the password is when the user's logging in. So that we can mostly handle. I'll go ahead and put it on here anyway, though. Okay, and then we've got level, XP, health, max health. I'll separate these logically by ID, identifying, level and XP, or sort of character things. These are resources, these are stats, and that's attacks. So those are your member properties. The first thing you need to make in any functions or in any class is usually what's called a constructor. You'll notice we did the public keyword here. By the way, there's 3 things you can do here. You can do public, you can do protected, or you can do private. Public makes it so that you can use this from what's called a class instance I'll discuss that in a minute. Private, basically, public and private are probably the two you most need to worry about. Private would make it so that it can only be accessed from within the class. I'll explain that in a little bit. But the first function is the construct. So you'll do public function double underscore construct. This is recognized by the system. So what this means is this function, let me see here. This function will be run whenever an instance of the class is created. I'll get into that here. We'll go ahead and do it actually. We'll do it before the display. If at session user ID. Okay. If user is logged in, load data and select page. Okay. If it's a user. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to load the user data. In order to do this, we have this user class here, which we're making a prototype of now. User.php. And we're going to say acquire user.php player equals new user. Now, player equals new user. The new here is a keyword that creates a new instance of the class. So what this means is that what an instance means is this is like a template. In reality, what a class is it's like a data type. If you're familiar with a string or a number, like an integer or a float or an array, those are all data types. What a class actually is a custom data type. So this is like saying create a new integer, except instead of being an integer represents a number. A user represents a user. And a user is much more complex than an integer, or just a number. So it has many different parts to it. But this is, in essence, a data type. That's more of a standard programming concept. So if you've come from more of a sort of a front-end PHP type kind of light programming, and you haven't taken many courses about programming, data type may be an unfamiliar concept to you, but it's sort of important. You'll learn it, you'll understand it more going forward. But basically, if you see this, these parentheses, this might indicate to you that this is like a function because it's just like this, right? And yes, you can pass stuff into it here. We did that with the database here. You see where we did new database object, and we passed all this in. All right, if we open up the database object file, you'll notice all of that got passed into here. So anything that you put in here will be passed to the constructor. We're going to go ahead and do that with the user ID so that this object knows what user we're talking about. And then we're going to go ahead and inject the system, we'll put the system in here too, or the database rather. We're going to go here, we're going to do user ID database. We'll put this here. Private database. Okay. So we'll say this database equals database. Now we're going to make a query to fetch the user's data. So these operators start to get a little bit funny. You notice this dash arrow? You probably figured this already, but this refers to an item within the user class. The syntax this is a special keyword that refers to a member of its own class. So when I say this database, it's referencing this. I can also write something like this ID. Let me close this real quick. I can write this health, and it will access this health variable that's a part of this class. So the unique thing about classes is that you can make functions which are able to access any of these class members. And that way, instead of having to pass 10 variables back and forth between functions, they all stay as a part of the class and you can just run the functions. You'll see more about why that's useful in a little bit. So result equals this database query, select everything from users where user, or ID rather, equals to user ID, limit 1. Just as a safety, in case for whatever reason this user ID should be coming from the session, so it should already be validated. But just in case someone somewhere tries to make one of these classes and doesn't pass the right user ID to it, we're gonna go ahead and convert the user ID here to an integer of itself. This should have no effect on it, but in the instance that someone forgot to tried to put some user input in here and didn't sanitize it, this will just make sure that this function works. This is a type conversion. So if you tried to put in, like, if you entered user ID of, like, John, this would convert it to a 0 or no. If you entered, like, 123 John, it would convert it to 123. You can read more about type conversions on the PHP website. Okay, now we're going to check to see if it actually worked. If this database, or, yeah, num rows result less than 1, throw new exception, user does not exist. Okay, otherwise we can safely assume that the user exists and we can load their data. So we'll just do user equals this database fetch result. And then we have to map each thing inside user to a part of the thing. So we're going to do this ID equals user ID, similarly with everything here. Okay, there's our construct. This is now going to load all of the user's data. So we're going to do that, and then what we're going to do here, I'll go ahead and do this the right way. Let's make a new page. So we're going to make this page profile.php. This is going to be user profile displays stats, health, money, etc. Function profile. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to start this like this, and you'll see why in a sec. What we're going to do here is we're going to make an array of pages. This is where we're going to do our routing system. So you remember how on our plan we said we wanted to do fighting, we wanted to have healing shop, we wanted to have a weapon shop. We also need to have a profile. But the thing about all these pages is you have to have some way of determining which page the user wants to access. So the most common way people will do this is a switch statement. But since I'm trying to make this tutorial about making something that's friendly towards scaling upwards, I'm going to use an array. This array, you're going to declare all of your pages inside. The first page we're going to declare is a profile. Profile equals. Interesting note, you can use a comma here even if you have no second array item. Or even if you have 17 array items, you can use a comma on the last one. The syntax allows it. But that's not true with very many other things. So we need some information about the page. The page name is going to be profile. This would be array. Name equals profile file. This is going to be the file where the function is stored, and that file is going to be profile.php. Now the function is going to be profile. Now, a lot of these things are similar. You can do this with naming conventions, but I'm going to do it like this so that there's as much flexibility as possible in case you want to name this user profile or something. You can just you can do it without messing everything up. That may not have made a lot of sense, but basically, you see how all these things are named profile. One way that some frameworks do things is they'll have a naming convention. So you will name a file profile. The function in it has to be named profile. And then you'll go to the URL/profile, and it'll automatically check for file named profile and load a function named profile. But I'm not making this so that it requires you to do that. This way, you can make the file user profile.php and load this function inside it. Or, you can do anything like that. So this way is just a little bit more flexible and a little bit more beginner friendly. Okay, profile name, file function. We'll add more to this later. Default page equals profile. This is going to be important. This is going to be the page that we load if there's no other page. Okay. Now what we're going to do is if get page. Well, we'll do if not empty. Not empty. Else we'll load the default page. But if it's not empty, we're going to say page equals lower trim get page. The reason for doing string to lower and trim is basically just in case the user accidentally somehow puts a space on the end of their URL that they're putting in, so something like that. We're just trimming the input so that there's a minimal chance of error. And then we're going to do if is set pages page. So what this is going to do, let's say the user goes to profile. This is going to say if is set pages profile, right? But it's coming from here. So it's page instead. Page. What we're going to do here is we're going to say require pages page file. So we're going to require the relevant file for this page, and then we're going to call the function. Now, calling a function is a fun little trick. You can do it just like this. Function. That might seem a little bit odd. It is, don't worry. But otherwise, we're going to do this with the default page. So the default page is going to happen when either the user enters the wrong page or they don't enter any page. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to make this echo profile for now. Now let's see if it works. Alright, cool, that works. So it's calling the profile function because I didn't specify any page. It should also work if I do page equals profile. Okay, it does, good. With that, I can finally take out this welcome to Warriors of Magic. And if not is set, I'm just modifying this a little bit. because the output from a normal page may be more fancy. It may include tables, so I don't want to enclose it inside a paragraph. That's good. That's good. All right, now let's add some actual interesting stuff to the profile. Gonna go ahead and make this sort of like a template of the user's stats here. Again, you can take all the user data here and just use it to plan out what you want to put on the profile. ID is not necessary. Their username we can do. Username. The other thing we're going to do real quick though, remember how we made this user object? We loaded it here. So we need to access it inside the profile function. Since we made it here, we can do it by specifying global player. I'm also going to say global system because we may want to use that for something. All right. Go ahead and put these in brackets. The other way you can do it besides putting them in brackets is to put them with quotes, but it's okay. We don't need to show that. We do need to show this. As you can see, I'm a big fan of copy-paste to speed up work. There's code editors that will also do similar things for you. For now, we just want to make sure that we can retrieve the user's data correctly, and then we can go from there. Okay, we'll save that, and we'll load this. There we go, username training dummy, level, XP, health, max health, strength, intelligence, endurance, and attacks. Attacks is not loading because right now it's a blank string. So, it essentially has nothing. Now, this is kind of ugly, so let's format this a little bit. One of the easy ways to do this, we can make a div here. Div style equals text align left, but we'll have to assign a width to it. We'll say this should be 400 pixels and centered, and text align to the left. Then we'll put all this. Other thing we kind of want here is we kind of want a page title. So I'm going to go ahead and put my title up the top here. We'll do this. We'll actually say it here. So now we've made this page class with the page title. Let's see what the display looks like real quick. There we go. So it says profile. Let's spiffy that up just a little bit. We'll go to the CSS file and we'll add a class for its page title. P.page title. We're going to say margin top 3px margin bottom, 3px padding, 5px background color. Make it dark red. And let's see how that looks. There it is. Actually, let's make the margin top 0. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Make the margin bottom a little bit bigger though. 5 pixels. Let's make the border around the content a little bit bigger, because it's kind of getting washed out now. There we go, it's a little more defined. Let's make it a little bit darker. Okay. Alright. So now I have a way of letting people know what page they're on. Now let's get back to stylizing the profile. So we have this div, it's 400 pixels wide. I'll show you here. Here we go, it's 400 pixels wide. You can see there's equal margins on both sides of it. You can see by this it's actually a little wider than it really needs to be. So we can go ahead and narrow it to 300 pixels. And then what we're going to do with all these is we're going to put labels on them. I'll explain this in a minute. Okay, I'm also going to clean up these things that didn't have their foot cleaned up. We're going to take health and max health and put them on the same thing, like this. So we don't need that. Strength, intelligence, endurance, and attacks. All right. Now we'll go back to the style file real quick. We need to add a thing for labels here. Label display inline block. So what inline block does is inline block allows you to assign things like width and margin to an element and actually have it hold it. If you look in the different, if you're curious about that, you can look more into the topic of the CSS display attribute. The possible options are inline block or inline block with a dash between it, which I just did. It's useful for a couple things. For this, we're now going to assign a width to it. Let's start with 9 EM. EM is a relative unit of measurement. This is basically relative to the font size. The reason I'm using this is just because when you're dealing with text, EM is a good element to use, because that way if the font is changed for some reason. Okay, now you see what the point of this was. We have all of these lined up, and then these are all lined up in a nice way. This distance between these is too much though, so we'll crank it down a little bit by changing the EMs. 8. Okay, 8, well, we can go with 7. You know what, I'm going to do this. Here, I'll make a variable for this. Okay, that's a little bit better. So this isn't the prettiest display ever, but it works. Now, let's go ahead and start working on the monsters and the attacks. We need to be able to make a monster. So that's actually going to require an admin page. We could lock these. We could add a user level and lock these behind admin permissions. But for the purposes of this game, we're just going to make a page to create a monster. Or actually, I'll put these both in the same file. And then we'll just do monster classes.php. Functions for creating and editing monsters. Function create monster. Function edit monster. We can call this monster pages. Monster pages.php. This is important for reasons I'll explain in a minute here. For now, we're not going to need this layout anymore. Focus on this. We'll go ahead and add this. We'll start with the create monster page. We'll go ahead and add it to the page list here. Create monster. Name is going to be, so this name is the display name. So we want that to be in nice cases there. This file is the file that it's in, which is monsterpages.php. And the function is create monster. There we go. Now just by adding that, we'll be able to use the page. So page equals create monster. Create monster. Now you see this header also automatically updated. We just don't have any content on the page yet. So we'll go ahead and add that. But before we start making this now, we're ready to create a monster. But in the same way that we created an object for a user, we probably want to create an object for a monster. A lot of these things are actually going to be the same. It's going to need an ID, level, health, or max health, strength, intelligence, endurance, and attacks. So we can copy some of these over to use, and then just delete what we don't need. As a matter of fact, a lot of this is going to be similar. We'll go ahead and copy this whole class, and then we'll change what we don't need. Actually, it's probably a better idea if I just do it from scratch so that you guys can see again. Well, this is monster.php, object for holding and managing monster data. Class monster. Okay, we'll copy it from here instead. So here we have level, max health, strength, intelligence, endurance, attacks. We're also going to need private database, public function construct, monster ID database. Actually, it would actually be a good idea to separate these two things. We can do this. Let me think about this. Alright, so there's two ways you could go about this. You can have this class. The restriction of this class as it is it's only suitable for fetching a monster from the database. That's fine. I think I'll go ahead with that because it's a little bit simpler. The other way to do it would be to have a class that you can actually create a new monster in and then submit that class to the database, but that's probably a little bit too complicated for this tutorial, so I'll stick with this version. Okay, if not, monster equals this database fetch result. Just this ID. No, we already have that. Yeah, actually. Okay, good. Call this monster.php. Now monster pages here will global system and player, and then require monster.php. Actually, for this page that's not necessary, but we do need the structure. Okay. What we'll do here is we'll have the display form. So one thing that you'll want to notice, all of these places that I have display form, it's a good idea to use a template for it. I'm just not going to fully template for this tutorial. But you should definitely consider converting all this to templates. The really important thing though is that you have all of your output at the bottom of this page. That makes it more simple to template because you can just output buffer. What you shouldn't do is have direct output inside your functions. So we're going to do the form for creating a monster here. I know it's a little bit ironic, but we'll just do here. Now notice I'm saying echo here, but this is actually going to get captured by the output buffering. So we're not doing direct output. It's caught by the output buffering that was started up here. Another important concept here that we have is we have a self link. So we're going to do here. So we're going to say we're going to make a variable called self link to global page. We can actually global this page variable. Well, maybe not, because notice this is a default page. Self. Okay. Self link equals. And we can global this inside here. And it can also be a good idea to pass this through the function. That's another option. I'm just using globals because these functions aren't going to change much. Or rather, they're very core. Like this represents an entire page. So there's really only one way this function is going to be used, which is going to be called from here. If this function was going to be used in more than one way, I would pass it up through there. We'll actually make a form container here too. Plus equals form container. Because if you remember from what we did with the registration form, we added the styling in the CSS to the form container class to make it make the form look better. Now we're going to go ahead and go to here. Take all of this. Put this in here. This all needs to be form attributes. This is all going to be text. Actually, for the level, we can do number. That's the HTML5 thing. name is going to be here. Now remember how we did the labels earlier? We do the same thing here. Level, label. Max health. Strength. Intelligence. Endurance. Attacks is an interesting case I'm going to explain in a minute. Style, let's try width 6 EM. We'll do the label width here. Label width equals 6. Okay, let's go ahead and see how that looks. There we go. That's not bad. That's not bad. How wide is that? Oh, that's like pretty wide. Okay. 300 pixels. Text align left margin. Left auto, margin right auto. So you'll notice we've been typing this into a lot of divs. Whether it was on the register page, the profile, we've been doing this a lot. What this does is this centers the div. So I'll go ahead and save it so you guys can see. What it does is it makes the, here we go, I'll show you. Alright, so you notice the orange part on the left? The orange part around the div, the blue part of the div that you see is the content of the div. The green part of the div is the padding, and then the orange part is the margin. So what margin left auto and margin right auto does is it sets both the margins on both sides to be equal. So it centers the div. Now, this is a little bit of boilerplate to write. What we can do is we can make a class in our CSS called, let me put it in here, div dot center div, or we'll just do dot center div. Center div. Now the reason this is separate from just center is because we want to reserve center to do text centering. Now that we have this in, what we can do here is we can just have the class, we can add a second class which is center div. And then we can take all that off because we no longer need it. It's pretty handy. I'm going to add this to everywhere else where we used that. Okay, I think we'll probably use it on registration as well. And that makes it quite a bit more elegant. Now let's add a submit button here and look for the data. Like that. Submit. Now we'll make this not empty. And the name of this, again, the name of this is just to trigger our form checkup here. See, create monster, create monster. So this will trigger that, if not empty post create monster. Now attacks is going to be an interesting thing. Attacks are a complicated thing. What goes into an attack? Each attack needs to have, at minimum, a strength, a type, and some text. We made a data structure for attacks though. You'll see it has ID, type, power, and purchase cost. Oh, I forgot one thing on here. Combat text. There we go. Most of them are going to need a name too. So we'll go ahead and say ID name, combat text, type, power, and purchase cost. Now for a monster, the techniques don't need a name. They do need combat text. They don't need a purchase cost. But we can copy most of this over. The way we're going to want to do this though, because we want to have multiple attacks for each monster. So let's say we want to have each monster have... We could do one attack for now. But I think it's better to plan for multiple attacks. So we'll have it say 2. We'll just do this. Reach for 0, I less than 2. Actually, we'll do 1. Okay, so we're going to put sort of a mini form in here. It isn't as important. We don't need this. Okay, so this is all we need. I'm going to make a label here though, actually. Real quick. Label style equals slash not important. Attacks. There we go. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to make a paragraph with some margin to indent this, essentially. That's essentially what we're doing, we're indenting it. Let's give you text, we need comment text. Name equals. Now, here's where we get to the fun part. Text I combat text. Okay, then for type, we're going to do a select. Type. Then we're going to put 2 options in it. Option value equals melee, melee, and value magic. And then we'll have power, which is pretty straightforward. Alright, let's see what it looks like now. There we go. Let's apply our labels to these. I think we'll use smaller ones though. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna go ahead and put these here since these are getting quite long. Okay, actually, yeah, put it. I guess this is fine. Okay. So now we'll see if we take a look inside this form. I'll open this up for you here. So you have attacks 1 and attacks 2. So these have separate names. Now you notice these brackets? You can actually submit these as an array. What these are going to turn it into when you submit, I'll actually show you right here. Now notice, the name of this is attacks, and the name of this is attacks. So I'm going to show you what happens when you submit some data. I'm just going to say smacks you with his tail, melee 4, magic shoots a spirit bomb at you, power 3. Great monster. Now, this is the PHP data. So you'll notice all of this got automatically converted into a PHP 2-dimensional array. This is the first attack, combat text, type, power. This is the second attack, combat text, type, power. So by making these brackets here with the number, the ID of the technique, and this, it gets automatically converted when you submit the form into an associative array in PHP, which is very, very useful. So what we need to do here is we just need to validate all of the monster data. Okay, so we've got level, max, health, strength, intelligence, endurance, and attacks. Oh, sorry, we don't need to global the system, we need to global the database. That's my bad. Change on profile as well. There we go. Alright, so we usually want to run some validation on these to make sure like they're not negative and that they're valid numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and actually convert all of these, convert this to integers. Max health is technically a float, but for the purposes of creating the item, we can call it an integer. And then we can test all of these. Wait, do this. If level less than 1, throw new exception, invalid level. And pretty much just do this for everything. This is the template for 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Max health. Strength. Intelligence. And endurance. Now moves is a little bit, attacks is a little bit more tricky. Because, as I mentioned, it's an array, we can't, strictly speaking, system clean that because it's a raw data type. So we're going to have to process each of the attacks individually. So we're going to go, actually, let's do it like this. For each post attacks as ID attack. Attacks equal array. Okay. Now, okay, sorry. So we'll need to check each item in each attack, which is going to be the combat text, the type, and the power. So we're going to say if okay, attacks ID. Wait, actually we need to check the ID. Okay. If not is int ID, throw an exception. Invalid tag ID. Okay, we're going to do this. The reason I have this not thing here is this is going to test to see if it's not returns true if this variable evaluates to false. So if there's no text in it, it will evaluate to false. So we're just going to say, please enter combat text. We're going to similarly do this for the other two values, except type and value have to be more strictly checked. But we'll do type here. Power just has to be an integer, so we want the integer to be higher than 0. You might notice I took the database clean off this and I used integer. That's because integer is a form of sanitization in itself because it converts something to being only a number. Any string characters get stripped out. Power. And in this case, we want it to be more than 0. So -1 technically evaluates to being a number. So we don't want that to be here. So we have asked for it to be greater than 0. Attack power. Text for attack ID. This is type. Now type we need to test to be melee or magic. So say if type is not equal to melee and attacks ID type not equal to magic. Invalid attack ID type. There we go. So this is basic validation for all of our things here. This will load all of our text into the array. And if there's any errors with any of this, an exception will be thrown. If not, we're clear to insert new monster into database, which we're going to do with this query. Insert into monsters. The reason I'm JSON encoding the attacks is because attacks right now is an array. You can't store an array directly in a database, but what you can do is you can use JSON encode to convert it into a parsable string. What parsable means is that there's another function you can use to turn the string back into PHP data. And that function is called JSON decode. I'll show you that in a minute. Again, notice I'm not putting the ID on here. That's because ID is in the database as an auto increment value. Okay. If database affected rows greater than 0, go monster created. Okay, time to see if it works. Let's make a level 1 monster. Oh, we forgot one thing on the monster. Data. The monster needs a name. Oh, and all these numbers don't need the database main function on them. I explained why a minute ago. But this does because it's a string. Okay, let me update the database structure here. After ID. We'll make this a 50 character varchar. Same as the other one. Okay, that's good now. Okay, so let's test this page out. Let's make this a little bit different. Let's make this a spirit wolf. Slashes you with its claws. Melee 3. Shoots a spirit bomb at you. Please enter a name. That's interesting. Oh yeah. Invalid max health. That's weird. 100. Max health. Max health. Oh. It's a typo. Please enter attack 1 power. That's weird. Less than or equal to 0. That's what I'm looking for. I could just do less than 1. There we go, our monster's been created. Let's browse and see if we can find it. There it is, Spirit Wolf, level 1. Now this is what I was talking about when I mentioned that JSON encode turns it into a string. So this is a parsable string that the JSON decode function can read through and convert back into PHP variables. It's a representation of the data in a text string.